and welcome to Here Be Dragons. I'm your host for this panel, Brian Kibler. For those who do not know me, I am a former Magic Pro Tour player, member of the Magic Pro Tour Hall of Fame, and now host of Commander at Home and this panel. We have a wonderful show for you all today. We're going to be talking about both Dungeons & Dragons and the new Monster Manual, and taking some delves and climbs into the mountains to learn more about dragons in that game. We'll also be talking about dragons in Magic, which I, of course, have quite the affinity for, and exploring all that there is in Tarkir Dragonstorm, which I, for one, am certainly very excited about, and sounds like some of you are too, yes? Yeah. All right, well, without further ado, let's get our show started. We are very, very excited to discuss...
Brian Kibler.
What was that?
You know who I am, mortal, and I know you. They call you the Dragon Master. Why is that, Brian Kibler?
Well, that's actually a story that dates about 25 years ago, actually right here in Chicago, where I made my very first Magic Pro Tour Top 8, playing a deck featuring Rith the Awakener, where I made Top 8 by Armadillo cloaking that Rith, and kind of liked dragons and big creatures ever since.
And what brings you to my cave here in Ilnois and the great lost snowbound metropolis of Chicago?
Well, close, but we're going to be talking about dragons. We're going to be talking about dragons in D&D, Dungeons & Dragons, as well as Magic the Gathering.
That should be quick, for I am here already revealed to you, but you may proceed. Tell me more of your Dragons and Dragons, and remember, I'll be watching.
Well, it's close, Dungeons & Dragons, but, you know, close enough. Anyway, let's get on with the show, shall we? Join me in welcoming our first guest from Wizards of the Coast, the Vice President of Dungeons & Dragons, Justine.
What's up? Was that Ugin?
I don't know.
All right.
Someone who's pretty full of themselves.
Yeah, there's someone has a few things to say about your dragon mastery.
Apparently. I didn't know we'd have company. But anyway, Jess, you're the Vice President of Dungeons & Dragons.
Yes.
So dragons must be pretty meaningful to you. So
it's like a whole 50% of my personality. Absolutely. No, I grew up with dragons. I come from Chicago, everyone.
Hey.
And so growing up here, in the cold Midwest winters, I spent a lot of time reading. And one of the things that was on my father's bookshelf was Dragon Riders of Pern. So I started reading that series when I was very young and was just like, I'm going to ride a dragon one day. That's totally a realistic outcome, but got as close as I possibly could.
I mean, here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, well, speaking of growing up with dragons, let's talk about a little historical perspective, right? D&D,
oh, yeah.
It's been around for a while. Dragons in D&D, also been around for a while. So let's kind of walk through a historical perspective on dragons in Dungeons & Dragons.
Absolutely. So D&D just celebrated its 50th anniversary with the release of all the new core rules, which we're very excited about. But kind of rolling back the clock to that first edition, one of my favorite dragon depictions ever, you can see here, this was drawn by Keenan Powell, who was in high school, was Gary Gygax's sister-in-law, and drew it in pencil that then had to be inked over. And you could tell this dude is like kind of really a avant-garde design, like kind of chunky and wild looking. So what a wonderful way to start off the imaginative possibilities of Dungeons & Dragons than just like, hey, you can make this yourself. Even this, young high school girl is able to draw the cover of like now one of the most iconic dragons of all time, right? And then you kind of go to the next one this like dead-eyed kind of like stare from this dude flying up here. He's about the same size as the centaur. Like, sure, now we can look back on it, and we will as we go forward today going through all these dragons. and go, okay, maybe this isn't the most formidable dragon I've ever seen in my life, right? But, you know, he has the same kind of look that I have on like a Zoom call that happens in like 5 p.m. But there is like a certain psychological depth there to those eyes, right? And I think you can even see in one of the earliest iconic adventure modules, there's a dragon who you see throughout the rest of D&D Brazenol, who you can make a deal with because he's just like terrified of dying. And so he's like, yeah, I'll make any bargain you want. Now, should you make a deal with a dragon? I guess that's between you and your DM, right?
Well, obviously the early days of D&D, we've come a long way since then, right? So let's move a little bit along to a little bit more of the modern era. This is more around a little bit before when I started playing D&D.
Okay.
But
okay.
I got into Magic through D&D, but it was in AD&D 2nd edition. So this was still a little bit before my time.
Yeah, this is classic red box Elmore art, right?
And this is iconic.
Yeah.
This is absolutely iconic.
It's super iconic. You know, it's Dragon v Barbarian. The dragon kind of has this like chickeny look to him. He's got these feathers. He's got like kind of that beakish sort of thing going on. But really, at the end of the day, one of the things that I love the most about this piece is the original sketch actually came in with a full adventuring party. And when Gygax saw it, he's like, you know what? I really love the idea of that dragon just jumping out and grabbing you. And so that's kind of how you get this perspective, right? And it brings that threat level closer to you. And it makes you really understand, like, hey, this is kind of not someone to mess with. Maybe the first couple of dragons you saw didn't give exactly the same kind of visual impression right away of that. I've always called this dragon, this red dragon, Grabby Boy, because of his little grabby hands. And it's, yeah, him going up against that barbarian mano a mano is pretty intense, right?
Certainly a lot more formidable and foreboding than the dragons that we saw in the previous iterations, and especially 1v1, right?
Totally.
I think this would be a little bit better for the barbarian if he had a whole party on his side, but he's gonna have to wait to get help.
Yeah, it's gonna be a rough one.
Well, let's move on a little bit to the 90s now. This is around the time that I started playing, and we see the monstrous manual here from, in fact, AD&D 2nd edition. So.
Right. So 2nd edition is when you start getting the classification out there of chromatic and metallic dragons. Chromatic dragons being kind of like the baddies in the colors, and the metallics being, you know, more supportive, or at least with less malintent than the chromatics. So you kind of see these two pieces side by side here, and you see an evolution of where the dragons are going. Right. There's obviously in Easley's piece here, there's just like this intelligence and kind of, you know, age, and the wings kind of being imperceptibly large. You're like, I don't really know how big this dude is, so this could be an impossible fight, right? And then you see the dude on the right, which is a super iconic piece because it kind of calls back to the original kind of like guy in the sky. He's got like that thick neck, but now he looks pretty vicious. You're like, there's gonna be some fire coming out of that dude. His tongue's all out there. He's really showing up and showing that he can be a terrible foe for your party.
Yeah, these are certainly looking, you know, much more imposing, and like you said, the sense of scale here is very different. You don't just sort of have this lizard floating in the air kind of thing.
Well, and mechanically it all balances out too, because as we march through time with D&D and the dragons, you know, the mechanics and the art start to really talk to one another. Like, it mechanically starts to get stronger and more powerful as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's move on to our next decade. We are on to the 2000s, early 2000s, and these are certainly iconic images, right?
Todd Lockwood. Let's give it up for Todd Lockwood's dragons, everyone. I mean, I don't even know what to say. Like, it's just absolutely kind of the peak of what so much of us really consider to be iconic dragon design. He's calling back to so much of what we saw in the earlier edition Red Dragons, but like he's bringing in this like feline, you know, kind of grace and intelligence. But actually, you know, at the same time, you don't think for a second that these dudes are snuggly. They're huge. They're muscular. The text of 3rd edition starts to really get pretty intense on you about this. It's like, hey, you know, red dragons, favorite food, young elves, you know? And you're like, okay, this dude's just gonna roast me up with his like internal propane grill. If I'm a young elf kind of stuck in the woods and he comes across me, right? So you're gonna be really terrified of these guys, and you start to get a little more depth into their cultures, right? So you start to learn like, oh, red dragons are kind of kicking it to Asmodeus as their god, which tracks because he's all about tyranny and destruction, which is their whole thing too. They love eating it for breakfast alongside with us, apparently.
And then as we move to the right-hand side here, there's clear homage paid from this version from 2008 in the 4th edition Monster Manual as well.
Well, and I think even to this day, you know, you'll see this as we march forward, like those Todd Lockwood designs like have elements to them that just really make the D&D dragons iconic. And even if we start shifting the design slightly in some directions, like the core elements were defined by the man himself.
All right, well, let's continue a little bit on to the 2010s. And here we have the 2014 Ancient Red Dragon from 5th edition. Talk us through this.
Well, I always like to give Zach Stella a shout out for everything that he does all the time for Magic and D&D, both as an artist and art director. But this is great, right? Like this is doing exactly what we were just talking about, taking that classic Lockwood dragon, bringing in the threat level. Like this dude looks huge. His wings are all frayed. He's coming for you, right? He's highlighting how dangerous you are, and that starts to get reflected in the rules as well in 5th edition. You start having environmental effects from the dragons. So say, for instance, a red dragon, right? Like, there's going to be a sulfur smell once you're within like a certain radius of this. It's going to start stinking real bad. You're going to be like, maybe I shouldn't be anywhere near where I am right now.
And I think that this does give us, you know, one of the first looks since the early dragons, where they sort of had the little guy floating in the air. It's got its wings up and, you know, ready to take off with its claws unfurled and, you know, clearly taking a head arched back, ready to breathe fire. So a very different look at our flying menace that has evolved a great deal over time to be much more menacing.
I mean, just even the wingspan is like so much larger. And you're like, if you started seeing like the shadow of that over you, you would run.
All right, well let's get to a truly terrifying visage of a red dragon with the 2025 Monster Manual. Now this, calling back to that original red box cover, right? This is clearly the 1v1 versus the dragon, but now this doesn't look like, oh, you're in bad shape, this guy's gonna grab you. This is, oh, you are doomed.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we're going for with these ancient dragons, right? Like if you encounter an ancient dragon, like this is the fight for your life. This is the fight for, you know, your world. These dragons are so powerful, and we really wanted to illustrate that, you know, in a more epic scale. So, you know, Josh Raphael here is doing just this amazing cinematic rendering of what it would be like with that camera kind of pointed right up at the dragon as if you're under it. And he's just ready to kind of like light up and just breathe that flame right onto you. It feels very visceral when you look at it, as opposed to like something you like more academically would observe.
And the fact that you see like the fire basically lighting up in its throat and it, you know, overtakes the entire frame. It is so imposing compared to some of the stuff that we saw early on. So, you know, clearly dragons, pretty terrifying, and players in D&D, you know, they can learn more about how dragons have evolved over time from the new Monster Manual.
Oh, they sure can. The Monster Manual is here. It just released this week. We are so excited about it. That completes the trilogy, you all, of the new core rules. Monster Manual's always been my favorite, right? Because even before I started playing D&D, I picked up the Monster Manual, and it just gave me all of the inspiration for creating monsters, my own monsters, these kind of creatures, the mythos behind them. Even, you know, even if there's not a whole bunch of like writing, there's so much you can just take out of the stat blocks and go, oh my gosh, what can this dude do? So along, you know, These are in full release this week. These were made with 10 years of players' feedback, like the rest of the core rule books. We've got new monsters in there, and of course, maybe we put some dragons in there too. Maybe?
I certainly hope so.
Maybe?
This is the dragon panel.
Yeah, I think you wouldn't have invited me here.
Right. So, all right. So obviously, Monster Manual, it's got monsters in it, right?
Yes.
But I think everyone here, we want to hear more about dragons, yes?
Dragons.
Got these other things in the cover. They're pretty cool, but that's not what the title of this panel is about.
I will say, if I could like show young me this moment where someone's actually asking me to tell them more about dragons.
Tell me all about your hyperfixation, please.
I'm like, all right, we are living the dream here. So when you're called Dungeons and Dragons, you end up being the kind of people who think about dragons a lot, all the time. You have very strong philosophical beliefs and opinions about what dragons are and what they can do. Same obviously goes for players, right? So we were like, okay, we've got an edition update here. Let's use the opportunity that we have to make dragons more awesome. And you can see right here, a lot of it is showing these dragons in their environments and what they are doing, and when they're being very actively at their biggest archetype here. This red dragon is the terrifying tyrant we all grew up fighting, but now you see what that really looks like rather than just kind of like floating in the sky, as you were saying earlier. But all of the things still stay really core to dragon design in D&D. The chromatic dragons are still traditionally villainous, bent on destruction. The metallic dragons are, they're counterbalanced, so they're a little more helpful. We really like to think a lot about how to get that mechanical and visual development locked in together. And so, kind of marching forward and giving all of these dragons new spell effects as well has been one of the ways that we're really putting dragons again at the front and center of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, and we're seeing sort of not just the scale of these against a individual or a party. This is a dragon that is clearly, wreaking havoc on an entire city, right?
Yeah.
The scale here is a building, and the dragon looks massive.
Oh, he absolutely does. And the heat from his, fire breath could melt so much.
Yeah.
It's absolute destruction.
So let's talk a little bit about dragons. And you mentioned giving dragons a little bit more in this edition, fleshing them out a bit more. Dragons, I think historically, people may think of a dragon sitting on its hoard, right? This is a great way for an adventuring party to go seek adventure and a great battle and get some loot. But dragons, we like to see them with a bit more nuance as well, right? A little more personality.
Well, and I think, the way that Dungeons & Dragons has always been designed, not in a dissimilar fashion to how Magic is designed, with the chromatic dragons kind of being broken into 2 pairs of 5, right? You're able to sit there and go, hey, on either side of this between chromatic and metallics, they're going to have kind of core motivations that are very different. And then across each one of those colors or metals, you're going to have different motivations as well. So, we see this red dragon. He's very intense, very very red in both the Magic and the D&D way. But they are not just monsters. They are monsters, but not just monsters. They have intelligence and motives and goals as well. And I think when we move on and we look at, the blue dragon, for instance, sure, he's also got some, he's a little bit hellbound on destruction and control as well, but he's really into, I want to conquer. I want to command entire empires. An ancient one would be looking for things like world domination or controlling extraplanar realms. It's not just destruction for him. It's really about domination and control.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's take a look at some of the chromatic dragons. You mentioned the silver dragon here. He looks a lot more friendly than the blue and red dragons we just saw.
Just because the chromatic dragons have maybe not as base of and terrifying of motivations, it doesn't mean that they aren't powerful, right? Silver dragons are drawn to preserving peace and encouraging greatness in humanoids. They might live in society. You can see just chilling here, hanging out with the fam, watching White Lotus or whatever they're doing. I don't know. But they're really kind of pushing towards ambassadorship, when they're an ancient silver dragon, for instance, that might be on a global scale, really seeking to create alliances and kind of heal, broken pacts between civilizations.
And then we have our copper dragon friend here.
Oh my gosh.
Is he reading a book?
He is. He's just chilling out with his buds,
Very
reading
different
him
than
a
our
book.
red dragon friend.
I'm not gonna lie. If I was gonna meet a dragon for real, like this would be the one that I would be most down to meet.
Feel a little more comfortable with
Yeah,
this guy.
he's really friendly. He's curious. I mean, he definitely looks like he's just like kicking it most of the time. He's just hanging out, having story time with his buddies here. So you can see that not only are we reflecting kind of the unique physical characteristics of each one of the dragons, but also their personalities and the biomes that they're inhabiting. Some are more domestic, some are more, hidden in a cave, some are living in a variety of environments, some of them are a little more specific. And for each one of the metallic and chromatic dragons that are in the monster manual, you're going to get like a full page depiction like this to really get you into a sense of who they are in the world.
Well, speaking of full page descriptions, we have our green dragon coming up next, who he's just kind of vibing.
Yeah, I mean,
lurking.
it looks kind of chill, right? But green dragons are elusive schemers and manipulators. So you can see that this dude, he might just like, oh, I'm just chilling, swimming along in this beautiful pond. But he's lurking beneath those waters, and those adventurers do not know that he is there.
They're in for surprise.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then a little bit different. Our black dragon here clearly is up to no good.
Much like my beloved Chicago Bears, the black dragons delight in causing suffering and pain. Unlike the Chicago Bears, their faces have a skull-like appearance, and they hang out in swamps and ruins, and they make a lot of friends with the undead.
All right, and then we have young dragons depicted as well in the monster manual, and getting a chance to look at this wormling. It's pretty cute, but it's also kind of scary.
Yeah, I mean, it's really that balance, right? I think historically throughout D&D, we've shown wormlings before. They've always erred pretty much on the very, very cute side. But they still have powers. They can still blast you with an ice breath weapon, take you down, do a whole bunch of damage. They are still formidable foes. So we really wanted to get that nice, healthy balance here. And this being a white dragon in kind of the ice cave environment. Like, you imagine you're like in a very tundra sort of ice cave, and you go pop around the corner, and this dude pops out. I don't think your first thing is going to be like, aw, I would like a snuggle. You'd be like, I need to run immediately. Yeah. And then maybe in reflection, you're like, but
sort of a combination of
kind of a cute little baby. Definitely gives that very childlike, get out of my room vibe.
All right, well, we've talked a lot about kind of that vibe, right? That these dragons have. But D&D is also a game.
Yes.
Right? And games, as the Magic players in the audience here, they have rules.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about how dragons mechanically have evolved in the new Monster Manual.
Yeah, I think a really good example that I like to use is the gold dragon, right? So, the personalities here they're elusive and wise, and they're generally going to avoid to seek combat unless it's necessary. Therefore, we support that through they can shape change into the appearance of a beast or a humanoid specifically. They have a breath weapon that weakens enemies. And then they have the ability to just banish and teleport away. So they can banish you, they can teleport away. We're really supporting that personality down through the mechanic expression of the gold dragon, which I think is pretty darn cool.
So there's obviously other dragon types to explore as well mechanically. So what are some of the other dragons and what else they may do that's sort of new in the Monster Manual?
I think part of it is we've expanded on their spellcasting abilities. The lairs work a little bit differently, but you would have to come pick up a Monster Manual to see for sure.
And where can people get that?
You can pick one up on D&D Beyond at your local game store or any number of other outlets.
Okay. Well, obviously everyone here, we're big fans of dragons, so we're gonna be doing that, right? Right? There we go.
We love dragons. We love them.
All right. So what are some of the ways that some of the other dragon types, we've seen them evolve? Right. Let's say green dragons. Mm-hmm. We saw the green dragon lurking below the surface mechanically in the new Monster Manual. What does that mean for us?
I think, for instance, they're just going to be able to do a lot more stealthy actions than they've been historically, and they're going to have some spells that are going to help support deceiving your party. So I don't want to run into a
Okay.
green dragon.
All right,
I don't. I don't even want to talk about green dragons.
All right, well,
anymore. They're a little
speaking of something
terrifying.
you might want to run into.
Yes.
We'll go back to the gold dragon, right?
Yeah.
A little
Okay,
friendlier.
gold dragons are friendlier.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Let's see a gold dragon in action. This comes from D&D's episode of Secret Level, the revolutionary gaming anthology series now streaming on Prime Video.
Oriel, this is Solon, who bears a terrible curse.
Calm yourself, child. You're safe here.
She's getting louder. No, stay back. This thing inside me doesn't like you at all.
The wicked do tend to fear me. I will take whatever is inside you and destroy it.
Heck yeah.
So that is a good combination of both clearly helpful, but also still kind of terrifying.
Yeah, very formidable. Like, you know that this dude is powerful, right? But at the same time, the words he's saying sound very helpful.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's just like, 10 stories tall and a dragon and breathing right in your face.
And I watched that whole episode, by the way, for anyone who hasn't. It's very cool. You should definitely check it out.
Thank you.
But anyway, Jess, thank you so much. There's clearly a lot going on.
Brian Kibler. I would like to be included in this reference work. Perhaps I shall sit for a portrait. Find me an artist at once.
Well, I'm not going to say no. So right away, yes, everyone, please welcome to the stage the amazing magic artist, Justine Jones.
Hello.
Well, Justine, welcome. It's great to have you here. And, we're obviously discussing dragons. So in what way are dragons personal for you?
So I've just always been a huge fan of fantasy. Obviously loved Lord of the Rings as a kid, read every fantasy thing, was obsessed with every fantasy cartoon and movie. And dragons to me are just like the ultimate fantasy creature. There's so many different interpretations of dragons. They can be so many different things. They're just kind of my favorite monster.
And you've been a magic artist for a number of years. Do you remember your first magic commission?
Well, I do, because funnily enough, Jess was the person who emailed me to ask me to do the cards. It was the first Secret Lair. It was the Dragon. That's the first one I finished, and it will always be my favorite child. Mari Hall was my art director for it, and I was pretty much given free rein to just completely do my own interpretation, do whatever I wanted. The only important thing was that it had to have the big nose horn, and also obviously be a huge, imposing creature that the dragon is. Yeah, so I really got to dig in with my own style, so many little details. I envisioned the golden color of the dragon being kind of like a reflective mirror. So to me, it's reflecting all the different colors that surround it. And yeah, it'll always be a really important card to me.
And the Dragon, obviously, a lot of Dragon fans out here, I imagine, right? I'm a big Dragon fan.
Oh, yeah.
And if the Dragon as your first piece was probably pretty nerve-wracking.
Oh yeah, it was crazy.
But if that was nerve-wracking, I have to imagine that it was pretty terrifying to take on your own imagination of the original Magic Dragon, Alpha Shivan Dragon.
Oh yeah. Well, Shivan Dragon is actually one of the first cards I remember seeing, is the Melissa Benson version, and it's just so iconic to me. As a kid, I was a huge fan of the Rankin Bass animated movie Flight of Dragons, and it kind of reminds me of the dragon style in that. I love the kind of like rubbery tummy and the little claws and everything about it is so cool. And I wanted to stay true to that. So art director Tom Jenkott reached out to me, and I was like so excited to take on a piece that was already one of my favorite Magic pieces. And I got to go crazy. Like, I tried to really call back to the original, the things about it that were important to me, the little grabby hand and the little rubbery tummy and the twinkling stars in the background. But I also got to dig in and make it my own a little bit. It's one of the most fun pieces that I've done, and I love it.
Speaking of that, we can see them side by side here. We can clear homage to the original. That we see the as you mentioned, such an iconic piece from Melissa Benson. Yeah. A absolute dream of many early Magic players, and we can clearly see the sort of homage that you paid to it and the resemblance there, but obviously very much in your own style.
Thank you.
But this is not just a Magic panel. This is a Magic and D&D panel for dragons, and you had a chance to do some D&D stylization of some dragons as well. So let's take a look at these.
Yeah, these are really cool. I never expected to get to do black and white art on Magic cards, and black and white is really like my favorite thing. It's what I'm good at. I know people really like my colors, but I love line work. I'm just a huge fan, and I like love to do just crisp black lines. So Tom Jenkott, again, was my art director for this, and funnily enough, the red dragon I got before I did the Shivan dragon card, and Ganax, the red dragon, is also a callback to Shivan dragon. You can kind of see.
Gonna get you.
Yeah, and I was really excited to do that one, especially because it was cool to do such like an iconic D&D creature as a red dragon. But all of them, it was so fun to be able to imagine them just like in black and white.
Definitely very sort of distinct style here that comes through. They're very neat. But speaking of iconic dragons, we have a lot of dragons in Magic to discuss, and we got a few more people to join us to do it. So everyone, please welcome a couple more guests from Wizard of the Coast, Lauren Bond and Forrest Shell.
Not alarming at all.
All right, we're starting with the same icebreaker question for everyone. So, Lauren, in what way are dragons important to you personally?
I remember looking at the 3.5 monster manual and like tracing the copper dragon and just being like, this is the coolest thing ever. But generally speaking, I also just love how they're so different across cultures, but also there across so many of them, and I love that they're kind of this representation of humans' creativity, like this hive mind creativity.
And Forrest?
Same. No, I'm just kidding.
Done. Excellent. Good work.
No, dragons have always been really inspiring to me as an artist and an art director. There's something just so, they represent like mystery and power. Like Here Be Dragons. It's not only the name of this panel, but also you see it on maps about the unknown.
It is.
But yeah, they've just been wildly inspiring to me as an artist, and I fully believe that without them existing, I wouldn't be in the position that I am today.
All right, well, speaking of things that put us in the position that we are today, we're going to talk about a brief history of all the dragons in Magic.
Oh, yeah.
So
easy.
let's do this. We're going to do this in 5 minutes, talk about every Magic and Dragon history. Important one. So, first, Shivan Dragon. Let's go.
Wildly aspirational, 15-pack, little bit toe beans. I love old Magic art so much.
Shivan dragons are all descendants of the original Elder Dragons. We find them in the Shivan region of Dominaria. I don't know how to pronounce it. Our own Magic planes.
So obviously, super iconic, got a lot of people's imaginations captured with Magic in the early days. Let's check out Legends. These are the original Elder Dragon Legends. For those of you who play Commander nowadays, originally Elder Dragon Highlander, named after these. And by the way, Commander damage is 21 because it's 3 hits from one of these guys.
I particularly enjoy that pre-Spark Nicol Bolas was evidently very studious, very Very just like, oh, yes.
Just a chill nerd.
Just a chill nerd. Like, what happened?
He changed a lot.
That's what happens to most chill nerds.
He had a dark turn at some point. All right. Well, let's move on, speaking of dark turns, to Invasion. I have a very soft spot in my heart for Rith the Awakener here, but any other people have thoughts on the Invasion Dragon?
Oh, yeah. Can we talk a little bit about Darigaz, the Igniter? Actually, Rith's brother? Like, I don't know if you knew that, but I certainly didn't know that.
Yep. Speaking of the Elder Dragons, these are the second generation of Elder Dragons. We actually saw a new version of Rith.
Yeah.
Favorite fairly recently in Dominaria United, and they're, we don't quite know what they're up to right now. So
Gave me an excuse to build a new commander deck.
yeah, there you go. You're welcome.
All right, next we have the Kamigawa Dragons. And I think from a gameplay perspective, these are one of the first sets of dragons, other than crazy people like me playing Rith, that really had like a major impact on competitive play, because dragons kind of, historically, they're these big creatures. In competitive play, they really had I just play a removal spell and remove your dragon. It's like, well, now these have an effect when they die. So Kakusho, still a nightmare of commander tables to this day, but back then in particular, Yosei was part of like a lock, where you just stop your opponent from untapping with like greater good and things like that.
I do particularly love, these are one of the examples of how we can use creature types in unique ways in Magic. So these are spirit dragons combining together to sort of represent something different from just a quote-unquote normal dragon. Combine things together, make them interesting.
Well, another very dragon-oriented plane, which we'll talk more about later. We have Tarkir and the Dragon Lords.
Our good Dragon Lords, these are, they were originally just kind of normal dragons and then eventually rose to power, forming their dragon broods, destroying all humans on the plane, not destroying, overtaking all humans on the plane and non-dragons, and now they're elders,
Here's a fun fact about Silabgar. More undead followers than live ones.
Yeah, he also has a zombie necklace.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Tassiger.
Just chilling
I remember when that card first came out, people were like, is that actually Tassiger? I was like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, that's intentional.
Yeah. It's a statement.
Yeah. Moving along to our more sort of studious dragons, I suppose. and I had to check the name of this plane. It is Arcavios?
It is indeed Arcavios. So very much in contrast to our Dragon Lords, it's kind of ironic that those were allied pairs, these are enemy pairs. The Arcavios dragons are a lot more about peace and harmony. They founded the School of Strixhaven in order to end the Blood Age on Arcavios, which doesn't sound like a good time for anyone. And they wanted to raise up powerful Spagic spellcasters to keep the peace on the plane.
And can I just say, Galazeth Prosmari loves drama, and because of that, I love him.
And of course, this is a crossover panel between Dungeons & Dragons and Magic, and we had a crossover set with Adventures of the Forgotten Realms. And we have, of course, the ancient dragons here, which have had certainly quite a splash in a lot of commander decks.
Absolutely. These are really, really fun to work on when we brought them over. Being able to bring these powerful dragons into Magic that, in many ways inspired a lot of the dragons that we had been making in our world building, but also were their own unique element. It was really awesome.
And then it's not, we have important individual dragons, right? We've talked a little bit about these cycles of dragons, and then we have, of course, a very central character to a lot of the stories, which is Niv-Mizzet, who is probably the most versions of any particular dragon.
He's had a lot of versions. I love that with his newest version in Foundations, he can in fact go infinite with himself, which feels incredibly fitting for his
Very,
character.
very Niv-Mizzet. And of course, it's not just dragons, right? Dragons, they've got fans. One might call them groupies. Like our buddy Sarkhan.
Oh, yeah. Sarkhan is the #1 dragon stan in all of Magic. Loves dragons, hates shirts, but can also transform into a dragon. So very appropriate on this list.
And of course, if you were at the preview panel earlier, you already know that Sarkhan is, surprise, surprise, coming back in Tarkir Dragonstorm. More on that later. But in addition, we have, of course, the Dragon Planeswalkers, our feuding brothers here. Our brothers, right? Nicol Bolas and Ugin the Spirit Dragon.
Ah, there I am, Brian Kibler, My place in history is assured, but more dragons loom. Tell me of Tarkir.
Well, that was already our plan, but thanks. Anyway,
Has this been happening the whole time?
both
Have
of
you
you
worried
you were
about?
leads on Tarkir.
Yes.
So there's a lot that's happened in Tarkir. So bring us up to speed on what's going on, or what went on, or...
All right, let's go.
Take a deep breath.
I'm going to try and breathe in between. So the first time we saw Tarkir, it was a plane. It was ruled over by 5 clans. There were, in fact, no dragons. They had been hunted to extinction by these clans, and all that was left of them was stories, memories, and bones scattered throughout the landscape. And then time travel happened. Our good friend, Sarkin, #1 dragon fan, went back in time, and he prevented the death of Ugin at the hands of his brother, Nicol Bolas. This had a few knock-on effects to the present timeline. So we saw the Dragonstorms increasing in strength over that millennia, and allowing 5 dragon lords that we talked about previously to rise to power. And this time, turn the tables and take over the clans, forming 5 dragon broods. But if you weren't a dragon, life under the dragon lords, was really bad. It was just generally unpleasant. At best, you were doing all of their bidding, and at worst, you were a zombie necklace. So, maybe not an aspirational existence. And as a result, rebellions fermented kind of in the quiet areas. We didn't see a lot of this, but they weren't really able to gain traction until after the Phyrexian invasion and Ugin's departure from the plane in order to go deal with that whole Bolas, War of the Spark. There was a thing happening. I hear it was a big deal. And as a result, the rebellions were kind of able to pick up traction. But it still wasn't enough. And so they enacted a ritual to summon 5 spirit dragons, representatives of the clan's ideals. And this allowed them to finally drive out the dragon lords, because naturally defeating a dragon frequently necessitates a bigger and more powerful dragon. And the downside is, though, when you enact a ritual that you've just recently uncovered from a mysterious archive that you're maybe not 100% sure what it does, can sometimes have some knock-on effects. And in this case, it caused the Dragonstorms to get more powerful and worsen. So now we see a Tarkir in our present day where there are 2 breeds of dragons. There are still clan dragons. These ones are beholden to the spirit dragons. They'll listen to them. They'll obey them. And a new breed of fearsome wild dragons, beholden to no one and form an existential threat to life on the plane.
So, no big deal.
Yeah, there we go. Everyone understood. Perfect.
That's a couple different thens,
Yes, if you think about it this way, Khans of Tarkir is a fever dream that never happened. Fate Reforged is what took place 12,000 years ago. Dragons of Tarkir was, Jay and Ellie, our lore keeper, will correct me on this date, about 5 years ago. And then we have the present day. There we go.
Okay, and speaking of the present day, Forrest, what's going on now?
Well, as Lauren mentioned before, the Dragonstorms are way more intense on Tarkir. We're talking Category 11. And one of the things the challenges that we faced when we were in early visual development is how we make these storms appreciably more intense looking. And so we decided, because they are containing draconic magic, we would up the draconic elements of the storm itself. So in the clouds, you see shapes of scales and spines, and they slither around. And even in this case, you see a dragon face in the clouds as well. And then we also defined the core of the storm, really defining it as this draconic magic inspired by magic you see Ugin using, and something like the morph token, and just spewing out all these crazy dragons onto the citizens of Tarkir.
Well, speaking of crazy dragons, one of the big new features here are the wild dragons. So tell us about those.
Yeah, the wild dragons were a really interesting challenge. I approached the artist I was working with only one golden rule, is that dragons needed to have at least 4 limbs and 2 wings, and that's it. They could really go wild with the rest of them. So what you're going to see is you're going to see a lot of references that you might not expect a dragon to be based on, like bulls, like hornets, like a mud skipper.
Yeah, oh, I love the mud skipper friend. Very good. You should look out for him.
And here we see a Huron-inspired dragon, sharks even.
Killer whale, I think, too. Like an orca at one point in the concept.
Oh, yeah. There were I mean, they are truly wild.
There he is.
Hey.
There he is. Look at him. Why do I exist?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Look at that guy.
Yeah, that is one of the shark-inspired dragons, and just really. And here we have the bull-inspired dragon. Very, very cool. Artists Alexander Ostrowski and Victor Adame Minguez really brought these to life, and it was really a pleasure working with them on this.
We also really wanted to, so previously in Tarkir, all of the clan dragons had very distinct breath weapons associated with each clan, but we really wanted to kind of up the danger and some of the strangeness. So the wild dragon's breath weapon can be anything. We had a great brainstorm just listing things that dragons could breathe, everything from like ossifying blasts to a hail of thorns and spikes. And you too can be in this next image, a Loxodon having a bad day.
Yeah, let's take a look at this poor fellow getting obliterated by spikes.
Yikes.
Oh, God.
Nice.
So, yeah,
It's still rough out there for the human non-dragons on Tarkir.
Tarkir is not a friendly place.
It does not seem that way, and it includes the return of some things that are kind of unfriendly to players' sensibilities in some cases. We have a brand new card to show you all. You're excited for that? All right. Well, you'll see if you're really sure you want to see it now. It is Storm Scale Scion. Let's take a look.
Hey, look, Storm's back.
And it is literally called Storm Scale.
Sometimes game design asks us for things very nicely, and we're like, that's a good idea.
Well, on the Storm Scale, this is yes.
Yeah. I'd put it
So,
a yes
it's
on the
a
scale.
6-cost 4/4 dragon with Storm, and of course flying. It's a dragon. Most dragons do fly. Other dragons you control get +1/+1. So, say you have a bunch of seething songs, various red rituals into this guy, and suddenly the air is full of a dozen dragons that are all pumping each other. This is kind of terrifying.
That's like a Tuesday on Tarkir.
You're not kidding when you say the dragon storms are really out of control. The dragon storms are really out of control. All right. Anyway, it's not just dragons that we have here. We have some other elements that are draconic in nature. So, Justine, do you want to talk a little bit about the new Draconic frame?
I would love to talk about the new Draconic frame. So
Yes.
Tell us more.
I was approached to do this by Dalton Panettiere, who art directed me, and he came at me with this awesome idea to create something that is just like really like a temple to dragons. Like everything, it didn't want to feel exactly made out of pieces of dragons, but almost like a sculptural element that really like honors dragons. And I had so much fun just like creating this really decorative piece with all the wings and the scales and making sure the composition looked right on the frame. And I'm really proud of it. It's just like, it turned out really well, I think.
It's
I'm really
heckin' awesome.
excited.
Yeah.
Also, that art looks
It
really
turned
good
out
inside of it.
So, first of all, I want to say, how do I get this on all of my cards? And secondly, I want to say
you.
that Draconic frames are, of course, perfect for things like this.
No? Hey.
Boom.
Yeah.
This is another one of the wild dragons, so you'll need to wait for a little while to see the main set version of this, but it is another one of our... I also just love that the artist's name is Massive Face.
Yeah, and it's a massive.
Massive face. It's very on brand.
It's very on brand.
Face on there. That's just true. And of course, if you were here earlier for the preview panel, you may have seen the new Mox Jasper. Well, let's check it out in the Draconic frame. That is gorgeous.
So one of the things you will notice is it is not just dragons that you'll find this frame on. It is any cards in the set that are closely tied to dragons, involved in dragon-specific mechanics, such as this one that does, in fact, want you to play dragons.
And, of course, we have Sarkhan. He's back, also in the Draconic frame.
Yeah.
Also, I will be playing
no
that
shirt.
as my commander tomorrow on Commander Home Live. Be there, Showcase Theater.
Yes.
This comes as a shock to no one. No one. But
You?
So we also have a few more pieces from you, not, of course, just the frame, Justine. Let's talk a little bit about the Storm Shriek Feral that you did for Tarkir Dragonstorm.
Yes, I'm very excited about this one. Aliana Rude approached me for this piece, and these dragons, I had to go a little bit of a different direction because my frame is so ornate. I didn't want my own art to just meld into the frame, since I also drew the frames. So I was very conscious to do a minimalist background. And when you finally see the frame around the piece, it's very cohesive and makes sense. And this one specifically, it's a faster, more aerodynamic dragon than I usually draw. So I wanted to do it a little more actiony and coming towards you. It also, I obviously can't say anything about what exactly it does, but this lightning that's coming out of it is a very important thing for this particular dragon.
And then you have a very different dragon that you did.
Both of these
Both
are
of these are very different than...
Well, very different than this guy, certainly, the Sagu Wildling. Let's take a look at him.
Look at this boy. Show us the lad.
He is much less aerodynamic.
Yes.
My son.
He's a large lad, and I love
This
him.
is maybe my cutest dragon. This one, so the artwork, I worked off of the original version of him, and it is very different than the kind of dragon I normally draw. So it was a little bit of a challenge kind of working in my own style to this kind of hippopotamus spunky guy. But I ended up having a lot of fun working with the textures and the leaves and the kind of barky face. And he's so cute.
The bad news I have is he may be friend-shaped, but he is not.
Oh, he is not. It's a trick.
Well, speaking of some unfriendly dragons, at least to the Dragon Lords.
Yeah,
If
definitely
you
wild.
were not here for the preview panel, you may have missed the reveal of some of the spirit dragons. So let's take a look at Shika and Taval. Am I pronouncing that right?
Shiko and Taval, yeah.
Yes.
So for all of the spirit dragons, one of the big things we were thinking about in creating their personalities is how they are different from the original Dragon Lords, because they do really bring in that third color, and that is a lot of what they're kind of emblematic of when they were summoned. So Shiko, for example, is much more action-oriented, really embodying that red mana, whereas Ojutai was very, I will stand here and pass judgment.
Yeah, and Teval is very active, lithe, and snake-like, and doesn't lay around on a pile of gold with a zombie necklace. One of the things I want to point out here is the design of Teval has these onyx scales that are tipped with gold. This is really meant to evoke the danger, but the opulence of the Sultai as they exist in Tarkir today.
Well, let's take a quick look at all 5 of the spirit dragons together here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look at these beauties. Don't ask me to choose which one I like the best, because they are all my special children.
100% though.
But because these spirit dragons are summoned by the clans, they needed to be emblematic of the clans. So we took shape language, materials, and not just the color alignment of the clans, and integrated them into the designs. You can see in Shiko the wings that look like Jeskai scrolls. In Betor, you can see the geometric crest that is very Abzan. In Nariv, they look fast even when they're standing still. They're crackling with lightning. And Ireni is bear-like and has moss coverings that is very indicative of the clothing design that we did for the teamer. And of course, Teval here is my favorite.
Okay.
Teval also, you'll be able to see on Commander Home Live tomorrow. So if you want to see more of these, absolutely, be sure to check that out. We do need to move along a little bit, though, to go back to D&D. So we are talking about both, of course, D&D and Magic today. And there is a new D&D product that will be coming out that it really highlights dragons. So tell us a bit about Dragon Delves.
I think it's highly appropriate for this conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you for asking, Brian. Dragon Delves is our first adventure release after the refresh of the core rules. It is 10 dungeons with 10 dragons in them. They can work as drop-ins to your campaign already, or you could string them along into their own adventure. It's pretty awesome because they're the first adventures, obviously, designed completely for the 2024 rule set. You can play any of the current adventures. They're backwards compatible. But we also, for each one of them, you may have seen on the previous slide, we've done unique art for each one of the adventures, and that is really specific to both the kind of adventure and the kind of dragon that you see there. Something a little bit, kind of branching out what those adventures are for 5th edition, while also hearkening back a little bit to those more like bespoke, if you think of like how Planescape or Dark Sun was like very like had its own artistic voice. We wanted to take that and like figure out how to do that for these adventures, and we're really excited about that. And I think if you look at the cover here, you're going to see a really great, cover of dragons, all the different, not all of the dragons, but a good amount of the dragons you'll see there. And then on the back cover itself, if you go to the next slide, please. That top left-hand one looks pretty familiar. I think that perhaps someone has joined the party, finally. And not only is one of the adventures going to be all illustrated by Justine here, but we have a really special surprise for all of you today, and that's the alt cover for Dragon Delves.
Yeah.
I nearly cried when I saw this, literally. I was just the happiest I've been in so long. Do you want to tell us anything about this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is like one of the coolest, most exciting things I've ever done. But also, I was shown Sauron and the Dragon, and I was like, I know exactly. I know exactly what I had to do. So I'd made my like ultimate red dragon cover. It was so fun, and I was really excited to do the baby black dragon on the back.
And then, of course, the actual adventures in this.
Yes.
What can players expect from those?
So each one of them is going to kind of have their own theme, and they're going to, vary wildly. Each one of them, we have one called like Baker's Doesn't, and that's like, oh, I've got to save, the bake shop from whatever. And then we have another one that is, a pretty traditional, like, please save this village that's getting torched by a dragon. And then we'll go through these pretty quickly, but each one of the dragons will be highlighted with kind of a historical background of their designs and their history and their lore throughout all of D&D. You can see, for instance, here's a couple of brass dragon examples. I don't know why I'm showing those off with you sitting here, Justine. But yes, so some art, and then maybe on the next slide we have kind of some of the original, like Todd Lockwood, design of how we broke down, the biology of each one of these dragons, and then just kind of going through the ages and looking at them up till today.
All right, and we see some of the history of the dragons in here as well.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, well, I believe we have finally reached the time where we are ready to discuss our favorite dragons.
Yes.
So,
favorite dragons.
Brian Kibler, this had better be me.
Well, let's get to it, shall we? So, let's start with D&D. What do we have at number 5 for our favorite D&D dragons?
This one is probably the most on-brand thing that I will ever show you in my life.
Also a magic card. I'm a fan of this one in Magic.
This is Old Gnawbone, a female dragon who earned her nickname from her habit of gnawing on old kills, often seen with a mangled corpse hanging out of her mouth.
Elegant.
All right,
Yes.
And
Old
number 5
Gnawbone.
for Magic, we have the iconic Shivan dragon. This is basically when an older Magic player thinks of dragons, they think of Shivan dragon, right? And an older Magic player thinks of the time they traded a mox for a Shivan dragon, and they cry. Moving on to D&D number 4.
Icing Death, not just a dragon, but a sword.
Yes. I have a soft spot for this because I got into D&D through the R.A. Salvatore books, and I even named my first LARP character Blizzard Icing Death.
Blizzard Icing Death. That's so.
Which
that's classic.
Yeah, that's the sort of thing a
nerdy.
13-year-old does, right?
I love that so much.
All right. And then at number 4 for Magic, we have the Dragon.
Obviously, the greatest dragon, creator of all other dragons except for the wild dragons, because those are natural dragons.
like an extension.
But
It's all
just
good.
flaps its wings and cosmically, like, wills these other dragons into existence, like Nicol
Number 4.
Bolas
Number 4 makes sense, right?
And Ugin. Parent of Ugin.
I'm with you.
And
I'm
Nicol
with you.
Bolas.
At number 3 for D&D, we have the star of the movie.
Yes,
Number
you can. Such a really cool thing to be able to be like, you know what would be better than a really terrifying red dragon? A fat red dragon. Love him so much. Also in Honor Among Thieves, which is going to be on Netflix by the end of the month. So
Hey.
definitely check it out.
For Magic, at number 3, because I got to make a lot of these choices, we have Rift the Awakener. Hey!
I think this is rigged.
It is. It absolutely is rigged. So at number 2 for Dungeons & Dragons.
A Chardalon from the Sunless Citadel, befriended a demon, made him his ally. Our Chardalon lost his heart and stuck the demon in his chest to replace his heart. What an awesome dragon.
Ugh. Okay. Well, we have a similar villainous introduction for number 2 for Magic. It is none other than Nicol Bolas.
Less studious, more menacing.
Yeah, he's not a nice guy.
No.
I miss when he was just reading books. And at number 1 for Dungeons & Dragons, well, we have another clip from Secret Level, now streaming on Prime Video.
That's a whole lot of dragon.
Tiamat.
Yeah, that's right. Tiamat, number 1. Bahamut 2, obviously.
Spoiler alert, you should still watch that episode.
Tiamat forever.
And of course, we also have
Yes, that's my
Bahamut.
Tiamat song. Yes,
That's
Bahamut.
counterpart.
In AFR, when we depicted this, the canaries are actually tiny ancient gold dragons. A little bit of sneaky lore for you
Hey.
there.
And at number 1 for our favorite dragon of all time in Magic,
Tread carefully, Brian Kidler.
we're on to you. It's Ugin, the Spirit Dragon!
I am so flattered. Yes, it's me, Ugin, the greatest dragon of them all. Now, go from this place and remember, I will always be watching.
Well, thanks so much to Ugin, our bonus host, and of course, our guests Jess Lanzillo, Justine Jones, Lauren Bond, and Forrest Shell. I am Brian Kibler, your host, saying goodbye. Thank you for coming.
Dragons! 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 Dragons!
Dragon.